Um, Before I start, a bit about me. As I was introduced, I was a member of the Electronics and Robotics Club, and I'm a 2020 batch graduate, so I'm technically not a student anymore. But I was a part of the Electronics and Robotics Club for all 4 years of my college, and over there, one of the projects which I had started in my third year was on swarm robotics. Now, this was a project which had stayed dormant during the first phase of the pandemic, but uh, we were able to revive it in a couple of months back, and we have submitted uh, a paper in a scientific journal on swarm robotics. Uh, this talk, however, will not be about uh, my research in swarm robotics as a project, but rather on how uh, the concept of swarm robotics itself uses different concepts which are taken from things that we see around us in biology. So I'll start with something which we call a multi-robot system. Now, as the name swarm robot suggests, you might have guessed that a swarm of robots is simply multiple robots working together, but it is not limited to that, or rather, just multiple robots working together does not constitute a swarm. So uh, I'll talk a bit about where the difference actually lies. Now, as you can imagine, as the task that a robot needs to perform starts getting more and more complicated, you may require more than one robot to actually accomplish that task. Now, what you see over here in this image is one such example. This is the robot fleet of NASA JPL, which was used for an underground search operation in the DARPA SEPTI challenge. And you can see that it is consistent of multiple robots, each robot having their own complicated structure. And here's here's a list of limitations that starts to arise once you start including more and more robots in the fleet that is supposed to do the work. Firstly, as you can see over here, each of these robots is uh, is a highly complex, sophisticated robot. You can see that each of these have sophisticated sensors, complex hardware, and each of these were have taken years to develop. So all of these robots have uh, very complex software that allows them to run. So the individual complexity of each robot is very high. Secondly, since the task that these robots are supposed to perform is also very complex, and there are multiple such complex robots doing that task, this because of this, we require a highly sophisticated and complex mechanism for communication between these robots. So this involves what information the robots share with each other, how do they share this information, what do they do with that information, and how does every individual robot use the information that it has and the information that the other robots have to decide its strategy in tackling the task that it is supposed to do. And you can see that as you increase the number of robots in the fleet, this coordination and communication is something which starts getting more and more complicated, right? Another thing which you can notice in this image over here is that each robot is different, which means that each robot will have some specific role assigned to it, and this role will be critical to the task. So if one of these robots failed, most probably you won't able to do your entire task. And well, a good example of this is uh, I'm sure you've seen those production lines in factories where you have a lot of robots working together to manufacture something, and there's something like a conveyor belt over which the half manufactured uh, object keeps traveling and multiple robots keep working on it. Now, over here, this is again a multi-robot system where each robot is assigned a very specific task. Now, if one robot on that production line fails, you'll the entire production line will stop and you won't be able to manufacture what you're manufacturing. So, in a typical multi-robot system, you have specific roles assigned to every robot, because of which you have multiple points of failure. And that is why the system is not robust. And The next limitation to a normal multi-robot system is the scalability. You see, if you have a very complex and well-defined mechanism for the kind of communication that we discussed, adding another complex robot or even adding another simple robot to this team would require you to change the entire algorithm that you're using for this communication and coordination. That is why systems like these are not scalable. Once you once you decide which robots and what robots are going to be a part of this system, it becomes really difficult to add more robots to it. And lastly, a system this complicated may require centralized control, which means there might be a central processor which is telling every robot what to do, or there might actually be a human controlling some or more of these robots, which means that the robots are usually not fully autonomous. There is some central entity involved. But then if you compare this with the kind of colonies that we see in insects, you'll realize that every single one of these points are uh, well different for colonies of insects or even other animals which we see in groups. Firstly, over here we saw that every robot needs to be extremely intelligent, whereas in colonies such as these, you'll realize that uh, no single individual is really smart. In fact, insects are really dumb creatures on their own. So no single individual is smart. Secondly, there is very little communication and planning between these insects because obviously they do not have the means to communicate with each other like humans or robots. That's why the planning and communication is extremely low in these insects. Thirdly, unlike the group of robots that we saw, here no single individual is critical to the task. So you can have a bunch of bees dying, you can have a bunch of ants dying, and that will not affect their task in any way. That will not change the way every individual ant operates, and that will not change whether the task, whether the end goal is accomplished or not. Right. So uh, you do not have a single point of failure of the system. It's fine even if you lose 10%, 20%, 50% of your swarm, and the task can still be accomplished. And because of this, another effect that occurs is that these swarms are scalable. If you add 500 more bees to a swarm of 2000 bees, that will not change the way in which every individual bee operates. In fact, every individual bee doesn't even need to know how many other bees are there in the swarm. It will just keep on doing its own job. And finally, there is no one who is in charge over here. There is no central entity. Now, you might think of the queen bee or the queen ant as being a central entity, but you see, the queen bee is not telling every single bee what to do. Every single bee is autonomous and it is taking its own decision, which applies to termites, ants, or any other insects which have these leaders. So no one is really in charge over here, which is quite opposite to every single point that we saw over here. And this is what makes a swarm of insects very robust compared to just a multi-robot system. Now, uh, what we can summarize this entire thing as each individual in a swarm is doing something very simple, but the collective effect of all of them doing that simple task is something significant, which is an intelligent task. So we'll see some examples of such significant or intelligent tasks. The first one which I would like to show is that in a species of ants called army ants, you can see that these ants are actually forming a bridge between a gap using their own bodies. They're actually uh, holding on to each other and uh, bridging the gap with their own bodies, and the other ants are actually crawling over these bridge ants to cross the gap. And you can see that the bridge that these ants form can actually be really long. Right. So here's another example. Hmm. Schooling behavior in fish or even swarming behavior in birds. You can see that these fish are forming these uh, they're making these formations which look like a larger organism. And if you've seen videos of these formations, you'll realize that these fish move in unison. They swim together, they turn together, and they never break their formation. And they use this formation to confuse predators. They scare predators using this, and they also to some extent evade predators using this. And I've attached a link to one of these videos over here. You can find many more videos online. And if you look at these videos, you'll realize that it is some really sophisticated behavior in these fish. And looking at it, you would feel that it's somewhat uh, a very well planned activity. But in reality, it is simply very basic instinctive behavior in these fish. There is no fish who is in charge of where the entire uh, flock goes. There is no fish who is deciding where they will turn. It's just simple instinctive behavior in every single fish, which leads to an emergence of a swarm behavior like this. And when we come to uh, creatures like bees, literally everything that they do can be considered as significant and intelligent tasks. Uh, these bees firstly build their own homes, and it's not just an ordinary home, it's some really sophisticated and some really brilliant architecture. Uh, they don't just build their own homes, they have specialized areas in their homes. They have places to live, they have places to store food, they have places for their young ones. uh, in fact, even when it comes to food, they process their own food. And there is another task which they perform, which is called foraging, which is basically scouting around for food and bringing it back to their hive. And even this task, it may sound very simple, but it is actually a pretty complicated task, because in order to look around for food, firstly, uh, the bees need to make sure that all bees aren't going to the same spot looking around for food. They need to spread themselves out equally. They need to make sure that they're not visiting the same area over and over again. So they need to know which areas have already been covered when it comes to food. They need to know which are the areas where they will usually find food. In fact, if they spot certain areas which have a higher concentration of flowers, then they need to somehow communicate to the other bees that this is a place where we require more bees to efficiently bring back the food. And secondly, when these bees leave their hives, they actually travel very large distances finding flowers. So they actually need to find their way back to the hive, which is also something which requires something which you would think that requires uh, really high intelligence. Another thing which we know that bees do is say that they protect their nest. So this is another collective behavior that we see in bees. This is again an example of organized behavior, which would normally require intelligence. I like this particular picture in particular because you can see a swarm of bees defending their nest against a swarm of ants, which also pretty much do the same thing. And other than that, there are also many other tasks which these bees do collectively, like feeding their young ones, feeding their drones. In fact, they also clean their hives. They also dispose corpses. So if you think about all of these tasks as humans, you would think that uh, like even humans are known to do all of these tasks, and when we do it, it requires a great deal of planning, and even then these tasks become really chaotic and difficult for us. So imagine building homes or finding food or uh, defending your home or doing any of these tasks with without any communication with the other members of your colony. Imagine how chaotic it would become if humans weren't able to talk to each other or write to each other or even communicate in any way and still have to do all of these tasks that we do and bees do too. Imagine the amount of intelligence that it would require for every individual human if a human was supposed to do all of these tasks. And then compare that to the intelligence of a bee. A bee has a really small brain, so obviously a bee is not uh, doing the kind of thinking that we expect humans to do when we want to perform tasks like these. So this seems a bit contradictory because these bees are actually performing all of these tasks with zero planning, zero thinking, and near zero communication with each other. That's why we are interested in studying how do these insects and other animals and birds really do this. So to quote a famous swarm roboticist called Magnus Eggelsted from Georgia Tech, he says that nobody is telling them what to do, and in fact, no one really knows what is going on. So what is happening in all of these forms is that every individual is following a very simple set of rules. And these rules are actually simple instinctive behaviors. So it is not very different than what you do when you touch, say, a hot object. Your instinctive reaction is to pull your hand away. And this is not behavior which has been taught to you. It is instinctive behavior which comes to you naturally. So these individual rules, simple rules that these insects are following, they are simple instinctive behaviors which aren't taught to them by anyone. But these behaviors have evolved in a way that when every single individual follows these rules, you can see a very complex behavior emerging in the swarm as a whole. So the key takeaway from this is that the collective effect of a simple algorithm on multiple coordinating entities can be a complex and useful task. And this is something which we often refer to as swarm intelligence, which means that a single individual in the swarm is not intelligent at all, but the swarm as a whole is very intelligent. So here are some algorithms that we can derive by actually looking at the behavior of insects and then try to see how can we incorporate these in robotics. So I'll start with uh, a simple algorithm called bclust, which is one of the first algorithms which was incorporated in multi-robot systems, which was derived directly from insects. So the bclust algorithm talks about the following two questions: how do bees find a good location for building a hive, and how do they agree upon that location? Again, for humans, this seems to be a pretty complicated task, having thousands of individuals finding the best location to build a home and actually agreeing upon it. But as as you might imagine, what the bees actually do is just follow these three simple rules. The first rule is that every bee moves around randomly, but with a bias towards warmer regions. Now the aim is to find a warm, cozy spot for the hive. So a random motion flying around with a slight bias towards warmer regions is the first rule that every bee follows. Now, when it finally reaches a warm spot, such that it is uh, pretty much the warmest spot in a small locality around it, what the bee does is that it waits at that spot for a fixed duration of time. Okay. Now, the first important thing over here is that the amount of time for which the bee waits over there. The bee's patience is is proportional to how warm the spot is. So the waiting time of a bee at a particular spot is proportional to the temperature of that spot itself. So there comes the second rule. When you find a warm spot, you wait over there for a duration that is proportional to the temperature of that spot, and then you leave. Right. Now the third rule is that if a bee sees another bee waiting, it goes towards that bee and waits with the bee at that spot. With the same rule again, the amount of time for which it waits is proportional to the temperature. Now these three seem to be simple uh, rules which won't really be very difficult for something as intelligent as a bee to follow. But now let's think about what collective effect these rules would give when every single bee does this. Firstly, you'd realize that the longer you wait at a particular spot, the higher is the chance that someone else sees you over there, right? Which means the warmer the temperature of a spot, the higher is the chance that you'll attract more bees. This this fact leads to formation of small clusters of bees in relatively warm locations. But the tendency of the best spots to form clusters is always more than the tendency of, well, relatively less warm spots. So eventually, if you let this run for a while and let the bees do this for a while, what you'll end up with is that you'll see that all bees gather at the best spot for the hive. And this can be seen in some experiments conducted by the person who wrote this bclust algorithm research paper. So they start with a cluster of bees, as you can see in this image, which is away from the best location for the hive. At frame 0, you can see that there's a cluster of bees over here, and the other bees are simply scouting around to find a good location. Eventually, by frame 3200, you can see that there are 4 different clusters which have been formed, of which the biggest cluster is around this circle. And finally, in frame 6400, you can see that uh, pretty much all of the bees have gathered around at this spot over here. So this is something which these guys directly incorporated in robotics to form a robot clustering algorithm, where a group of robots tries to find an ideal spot for a particular task and tries to agree upon it. And here are some more simple algorithms followed by other insects and creatures, which also lead to interesting emergent behaviors. Now we saw an image of these fish traveling in specific formations, right? Now, the way that the fish do this is actually very simple. What every individual fish is thinking is simply these 2 rules. Firstly, maintain the distance with all of your immediate neighbors. And secondly, keep moving. This is literally all that a single fish is thinking. But if you think about it, when everyone does that, when everyone maintains their distance with their neighbors, and everyone makes sure that they don't stop swimming, or they don't, in case of birds, they don't stop flying, you'll see emergence of these well-formed formations which do not break. I've linked a video by TEDed over here, which explains this behavior. There is another interesting behavior that we see in insects, which is the flashing of certain species of fireflies tends to synchronize after some time. So all of the fireflies within a particular area, they flash their lights in a synchronized fashion. And again, this sounds like something complicated, but what every individual firefly is doing is that, firstly, it keeps flashing its light for a fixed duration of time, and then it pauses this process for the same duration. Okay. And then while it is doing this, it simply looks at its neighbors and it checks whether a majority of its neighbors is starting the flashing process before it, or if it's starting the flashing process after it. And accordingly, it makes a slight correction in whether to start the flashing process early next time or whether to start it slightly late next time. And when every firefly does this, after a while, you'll see that the entire swarm of fireflies is flashing their lights in a synchronous fashion. You'll notice a similar thing in chirping of crickets. And finally, collective transport by ants is something which we have been fascinated for a long time. So when it comes to ants, again, it is 2 basic rules. Firstly, if you see a piece of food which is not moving, then randomly either try to lift it or pull the food. So you choose one of these 2 roles, either lift or pull. And secondly, if the ant notices that the food is not moving in the right direction, it simply switches its role from pull to lift or from lift to pull with a small probability, and this probability is proportional to the error in the desired velocity of this part of food. So suppose the food is moving in the right direction but with a slightly smaller speed, or suppose it is moving with a good speed in a slightly different direction, then that is not a very large error. So the ant doesn't really need to switch its role. But if it is not moving at all, or if it is moving in a completely different direction, then that means the ant needs to switch its role. So from the perspective of one single ant, the task is simple. If the food is not moving, try to lift or pull it. And if it is moving wrongly, then switch your role, depending on how wrongly it is moving. Again, I've linked a video of this over here. So what you can understand from all of this is that, as I've mentioned earlier, an individual does not need to think much. It just needs to follow these basic instincts, and the behavior will emerge out of the entire swarm. So here's how we incorporate this in robotics. Just like every single insect, now every single robot need not be smart. It simply needs to follow a very basic set of rules, and often this set of rules is derived directly from what we see in nature. And now our requirements are the following. Firstly, you require autonomy, which means that each robot now needs to take its own decisions without being commanded by any other robot to do so. So because of this, you'll uh, it won't matter if any other robot stops functioning. An individual robot will still be able to take its decisions. The second thing that you require is that your algorithms need to be local in nature, which means that the decisions of a robot depend on what it sees in its immediate neighborhood. It does not depend on what is happening somewhere far away. And that is why it doesn't even require communication, because it is acting upon only what it sees. And finally, you require anonymity, which means that the decisions of a robot are not reliant on any particular type of robot, or they are not reliant on the identity of a robot. And because of this, because of the last two, what happens is that now your system does not depend on how many robots there are in the system. Your system does not depend on what the other robots are doing. A robot simply needs to look around itself and then follow a very simple rule. That is all that an individual robot needs to do. And the result, a complex emergent behavior. So in the image that I've put over here, what these people from Harvard have done is that I'm not sure if you can see the image properly over here. So in the center over here, there is a piece of food which is being carried around by a group of ants, and they've put this kind of barricade of Lego around these ants so that the ants have just a small gap to actually go out of this barricade. And then what they've done is that they've studied the trajectory of every single ant, and they've studied the trajectory of the group of ants as a whole, and they've plotted these trajectories. After conducting this experiment multiple times, if you're able to figure out the set of rules that every ant is following, then if you think about it, you directly have an algorithm for using robots for a search and rescue operation for disaster management. Because you see, if there has been a disaster and there is an unstructured unknown environment from which you have to rescue a survivor, and additionally if there's something like a fire or if there's a lot of smoke because of which the robots can't really look around, what you require is an algorithm where uh, simple robots which are uh, a part of a scalable independent decentralized system need to have an algorithm by which even if they are blind they should be able to rescue a survivor even when the exit is really narrow and at an unknown location. So you have uh, a huge number of uh, difficulties that the robots would uh, a huge number of difficulties that the robots will have to overcome in order to perform a search and rescue operation like this. But if you study what these ants are doing, you'll realize that what you need to do in these robots is pretty much the same. And that's how we can incorporate these behaviors directly in a swarm of robots which are not so complex and not so intelligent. And here's a list of more potential applications other than the search and rescue that I described. So firstly, you can use these robots for exploration. You can map an area using multiple robots. You can search for objects of interest. You can use a swarm of robots for agriculture in almost any operation that agriculture requires, including fertilizing, sowing seeds, harvesting crop, or even transporting the crop to some storage unit. You can use these robots in disaster management, as I explained, which means you can use them for search and rescue, but you can also use them for uh, collective transport of resources. You can use them to clean up, say, uh, a crashed building or a crash inside a mine. You can use them for cleanup of toxic waste. You can use them for putting out fires. You can use these robots for gathering resources. In fact, you can also use swarm in defense for surveillance operations, recon operations, finding landmines, uh, going to places where it is dangerous for humans to go. You can actually build an autonomous army using swarms of robots. Another very useful application in industry is using swarms for coordinated transport in warehouses. You can use, in fact, you can use swarms of robots for construction, especially in places where it is dangerous for humans to actually go. And this construction is not just limited to cities, but this is rather more relevant in places like, say, precarious regions of mountains, building roads, or even extraterrestrial places. Like if you want to build something on Mars, if you want to build some research station like the ISS on Mars, you can't send humans over there to do that. So you would require a swarm of robots to do that. And you can also use them for establishing network or connectivity with areas which do not have a network by sending these beacons, uh, say inside a cave, or to regions which do not really have good connectivity. So you can see that there are tons of applications which you can think of, and I've just put a few over here. So I'll move to some videos of some research that has been done in swarm robots. So I'll start with this video of a swarm of drones making formations the way we saw in fish. Uh, can you guys hear the audio of this? Okay, I'll just mute it anyway. So what you can see over here is that there's a swarm of drones which is traveling in a flock while maintaining a formation. In fact, it can go from one formation to another formation, as you'll see in a moment. So these are all autonomous drones which are taking their own decisions. So over here you can see that the swarm is going from one formation to another formation. These are drones built by KML Robotics. Here you can see that there's a formation, but there's an obstacle in between. So the robots actually changed their formation temporarily to travel through the gap and then went back into their formation. And over here you'll see that the robots are traveling in the shape of an 8, which is difficult, especially at the intersection, where the robots cross each other. I'm not sure if you're able to do this, but they're avoiding all collisions at this intersection of those two circles of the 8. So this is an example of formation and flocking behavior in swarms of drones. Going further, these are drones built by the GRASP lab of University of Pennsylvania. So a single drone is capable of, it has a gripper at the bottom, as you can see, and it is capable of lifting objects. Okay, but you see that this object is too difficult for a single drone to pick up. That 4 drones are collectively picking up this wooden cross and they're transporting it around. And you can see that objects of different shapes can be picked up by these drones and transported around the lab. So this is an example of collective transport along with flocking, which again uses inspiration from things that we see in nature. And this is something even more interesting. So over here, again, you have a drone which is capable of lifting these bars. And what a single drone can do is that it can arrange these blocks and construct simple structures out of them. An individual robot simply knows what structure is supposed to be built. Now, what you can do is, what these researchers have done is that they introduced multiple drones. And now these drones are, again, every single drone simply knows what structure is supposed to be built, but the drones do not have an idea of what the other drones are doing. In fact, they don't even care about the existence of other drones in the system. So what they're doing is they're going to the location where they can pick up these bars. They are coming to the construction site. They're looking at what has been constructed so far, and based on that, they're making the decision on what is the next construction step that they're supposed to do. And in the 3 different videos that you see over here, you can see them building 3 different structures. And this algorithm can be virtually used for any number of drones to build any structure which involves bars like these. So this is an example of how drones can be collectively used in construction. And how much time do we have? Well, we have some time. So I won't spend much time on this, but this is a modular robot is another kind of swarm robot where the robots actually form structures out of their own bodies, like so. We'll see a group of drones which are actually connecting to each other mid-air and forming structures. If you go a bit further, you can see that they have formed this L-shaped structure while still staying in air. And you can see them forming different kinds of structures. So over here, you're forming something like a plus sign. I'm not sure how smooth these videos are streaming them, but I've put the links of all of these videos in the slides, so I can share these links with you later, and you can see the full videos. So here's an formation of just a minute. Yeah, here's an example of formation of structures mid-air, and in the video over here, the modular robot system called SMORES, where you see that there is a gap, and every robot is independently goes across this gap. But multiple robots can connect to each other and form a structure which is able to go across it. And in these systems, you can have multiple robots form literally different robots by connecting to each other into different configurations. So here's a video of different robots and forming a mobile manipulator, which is like something like a robotic arm which can move around. On top of that, this particular modular robot, or in fact, any modular robot, can not just form different configurations, but they can also reconfigure into different shapes. So now here you can see multiple robots connecting to each other and forming something like and here you can see robots connecting to each other and forming something like I think this video is hanging. I'll just check if I'm still here.
Yeah,
I'm still here, right?
Yeah. Just your voice is breaking a bit in between.
Okay. Is there any particular slide for which you could not hear, or any part you could not see?
Like it just breaks in between a bit.
I can go back to the part.
Yeah, it just breaks in between a bit.
Okay, your voice is also breaking for me. Should I switch my internet? I think I should try doing that. Okay, I can't see my other internet, so I don't think that's an option. Yeah, I think we'll have to stick with this. Is it breaking too much, or is it understandable?
It's understandable, I think. Like, just parts it breaks, but I think it's fine.
Okay. What I can do is I can switch to my mobile phone yeah, but that would also be a bit difficult. Yeah, I'll just continue like this.
Sure.
So that's where I don't have to stream much. Okay. So looking at these videos, just a minute. Yeah. So now I think we have around 10 minutes left. So there are two other relevant, interesting aspects of swarm robotics which I would like to discuss. First one is self-evolving swarms, which basically draws inspiration from evolution itself. So uh, the idea over here is that until now we were studying individual colonies of insects and fish and birds, and we were thinking about what rules might these uh, organisms be following, and then we were trying to think about how can we incorporate these rules into robotics. But you see, all these rules in these uh, organisms have evolved out of uh, have developed out of evolution, right? So what if instead of teaching our robots to follow these rules, what if we teach our robots how to evolve to learn these rules themselves? So doing this is not really as difficult as it sounds. What you need to do is firstly you need to run this in simulations. So uh, what you do is you simply simulate a very inefficient swarm. Okay. And then what you do is you simulate natural selection itself. And then you allow the robots to evolve on their own based on the natural selection that you have coded. So what we mean by simulating an inefficient swarm is that uh, you simulate a swarm of robots, and for every robot, you give it a brain of a randomly initialized neural network. Okay. Now, for those of you who understand what a neural network is, uh, this would just be a neural network where the weights are randomly initialized. And for those of you who do not know what a neural network is, think of this as a function, a mathematical function, which is taking the information from the robot sensors as an input, and uh, it is calculating some direction of motion for the robot as an output. And how is the function doing this? It is doing it completely randomly, which means initially the direction of motion which you will get as an output would be absolutely random. And then here's what you do now. What you do is, as I mentioned earlier, you simulate a swarm where every robot has a different randomly initialized brain, so to say. So every robot is taking some sensor input. It is doing something absolutely random on that sensor input, and then using that, it is uh, calculating some direction of motion for itself. So initially, obviously, for the generation 0 of your robot, you will have every robot traveling in absolutely random directions. That is why your swarm as a whole will initially perform very badly. But then what you do is you let the swarm do what it wants for a while. You let every robot do what it wants for a while, and then you analyze their behavior and you pick out the ones which perform the worst. Of course, at this point, every robot is performing badly at the task that you wanted to accomplish, but there will be some robots which are worse than the other robots. So what you'll do is you simply select out the robots which are bad at what the robots which are worst at the task which is supposed to be done, and you simply eliminate them. Okay, survival of the fittest. You find the worst performing robots and you eliminate them. And the next step would be you replicate the remaining robots, but with a slight modification, a slight random modification, which would be something like a mutation. So the weights of the neural networks that you had, or the parameters of the function that you had in the beginning, you'll simply modify them randomly with a very small amount. So you'll end up with a new generation of robots, which is slightly better than the previous generation. And then you'll do the same thing. You'll let these robots run for a while. You'll let them do what they want for a while. And again, after a while, you'll analyze which robots perform the worst. You'll eliminate those robots. You'll replicate the remaining robots with another slight random modification. And doing this, you can run multiple generations of robots. But here's the thing. Since you're simulating all of this, you can run an entire generation of robots within a fraction of a second, which means within a minute, you can run hundreds of generations. And within hours, you can run thousands or even millions of generations, with every single generation slightly better than the previous generation at what you wanted to do. So after thousands or millions of generations, your entire swarm would actually be very good at the task that you wanted to do. And if you look at every individual robot, it still doesn't have any idea about what it is supposed to do. It is just evolved out of multiple generations to do the task that you wanted to do. So I think this is one of the most interesting ways in which we can incorporate something that we see in nature directly into swarm robotics. And finally, the last thing that I would like to discuss is something called biohybrid systems. So these are actually swarms which have insects and robots working together. So here's where we go a bit more in the sci-fi direction. So there's a project called INSEEBot, a European project called INSEEBot, where what they did was they built a small robot and covered it in odors of a cockroach. Now, what this robot did was that it went and infiltrated a group of cockroaches, and it pretended to be one of them. And then it didn't just stop at that. What it did was the robot actually tricked the cockroaches into acting against their own interests. So over here you see an image where this is a robot covered in cockroach odors, and these cockroaches actually think that the robot is one of them. And there have been many other experiments such as these with different insects, where a robot infiltrates the swarm, pretends to be one of them, and actually convinces the swarm of insects to do something which it wouldn't have usually done. So over here, what you see is a cricket is interacting with a small robot which is pretending to be a cricket. And this swarm robot actually has the ability to establish dominance among a group of crickets so that it becomes the alpha among that group. And well, applications of this are currently limited to things like pest control. Imagine that if you have an infestation of cockroaches, what if you could simply send a robot that leads the cockroaches elsewhere? Or an even better application of these things would be in agriculture. Suppose you have an infestation of, say, locusts. What if instead of spraying harmful pesticides on your crop, you could send a swarm of these imposter robots among the swarm of crickets, and these imposters can simply lead the lead the locusts elsewhere without destroying the crop. So these are some pretty interesting applications of biohybrid swarms. And there are many other relevant, interesting videos which I have put up over here. I'll also add some more to the list. I would like to end the talk over here. We started off with simple insects, and we ended up with something like cyborg sci-fi stuff. So I guess this would be a good place to stop. If anyone has any questions about swarm robotics in general, or anything from the talk or otherwise, you can feel free to ask the questions. I'll just stop presenting now. won't the robots developed by artificial evolution be less efficient than the ones controlled by an algorithm designed by us? Uh, yes, that is true, but in a way, it also depends on uh, what you want the robots to do. So, for example, there are certain algorithms that we can't really we can't really come up with an algorithm for certain tasks, and for that, we don't really have an option to hard code those algorithms, which is similar to the reason why we use ordinary neural networks. It's because uh, the the algorithms that would be required to do a particular task might be too complex to actually hard code. And in some cases, you may want the swarm to do a task which is something which is not really seen in insects, but you simply want to use the principles of swarm robotics. So that is one more area where you would want to try alternative methods rather than studying insects or uh, thinking up algorithms on your own. But currently, the ones through evolution are less efficient than the ones designed by us, because this evolutionary swarm robotics is a topic which is relatively much more recent. So there's still a lot of way to go in self-evolving swarms, but it is definitely something which has potential to become uh, better than the kind of methods that we are using right now. Okay, the second question is, what exactly does anonymity mean for robot, which is a part of a swarm? Okay, so let me go back. Oh, I'm not presenting now, right? Never mind. So if you remember the original image of a multi-robot system that I showed you, you had certain robots which were aerial robots, you had certain robots which were legged robots, there were wheeled robots. So every robot had a different identity and a specific role in the swarm, right? So if one robot is interacting with another robot, that depends on what. So if I am a robot and I'm interacting with another robot, that depends on multiple things, such as what is my identity, what is my role. The second thing which it would depend on is which robot I'm communicating with and what is that robot's role, right? Whereas in a swarm, in the kinds of swarms that we saw, no individual robot really has a role. So the way a robot would communicate with other robots doesn't really depend on the identity of a robot. In fact, a single robot doesn't even have a unique identity. Every single robot is just following the same algorithm. So that is what we mean by anonymity. There is an absence of identity. Okay, there's one more question which I missed. Why do we need to make only a slight modification? Can't we make significant changes? So the reason to have slight modifications is that we don't know what significant change to make, because since we have randomly initialized the neural network, we don't know what parameter change is going to cause what effect. So you can relate this with evolution that occurs in actual humans or other animals. So an offspring of an organism is slightly different than its parent. Making it completely different would be like a human giving birth to something which has one wing and three legs pointing in opposite directions. So this would be something like a significant change. We don't know whether that change would actually be useful or whether it would actually harm the entire swarm itself or the individual. What we need is that we have the best performing individuals in a group, and we want the new individuals to be similar to them, but slightly different, right? If you make them much more different, and if you put significant changes, then the new individuals might actually be worse than the individuals that you originally eliminated. That is why we need to make minor modifications to the best performing individuals. And the reason to make modifications is that you still need the new individuals to be different. You don't want the new individuals to be same either, right? So that's why we need to make modifications, but we need to make minor ones, which is the same as the reason why minor mutations work for the better of a species of organisms. Also, you people can turn off your mic if you want, and you can directly ask the question. I guess it would be easier to describe the question and discuss whether the answer that I'm giving is the kind of answer that you wanted. Okay. If others do not have any questions, are there any follow-up questions to these, or were you satisfied with the answer that I gave, or was it something different that you were asking for? Okay, so I guess if there are no more questions, I can hand it over back to CT.
Yeah, thank you, Rishikesh, for the amazing session, and thank you everyone for attending.